From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's ahead. K-State's Doug Jardine talks about why you corn growers here in Kansas are contending with so many stand lodging problems here at harvest time, often having to do with stalk rot disease. Doug will advise you to check your standing corn now for lodging potential ahead of harvest. Following then, K-State's Mike Stamm talks about what opportunity remains for you producers in this region to plant winter canola successfully in the coming days. Among other things, Mike will focus his remarks on variety selection and weed management. And on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Dennis Patton talks about successfully planting and establishing landscape trees here in the fall. All that here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is the K-State Radio Network. Glad to have you along once again for another Agriculture Today. Here in the state of Kansas, we're into corn harvesting now. A long ways to go. And in that, a number of you producers are encountering complications with your harvest because of plant lodging. That can be attributed often to a condition known as stalk rot disease. I want to get into what's going on out there and why that might be such a prominent problem this corn harvest, as Doug Jardine is along once again. He's a row crop disease specialist, K-State Research and Extension, as you know. So what are you hearing, Doug, from the countryside on this prevalence of stalk rot?
Okay, I'll get to that in just a second, because I want everybody to understand that over time, stalk rots collectively are the number one cause of yield loss in corn in Kansas. Even nationwide, we estimate every year on average somewhere between a 5 and 10% yield loss. So this is nothing new. It's just that in some years it's worse than others, and it appears that 2019 is one of those years. Yes, as far as reports of stalk rot, I personally have seen quite a bit of stalk rot in the Kansas River Valley. I was doing a plot tour in Marshall County a week or so ago, and several of the farmers were reporting to me that they already had some corn going down. And I've gotten some reports of dryland corn in western Kansas having some issues. So I can't say that it's occurring everywhere in the state, but there are certainly pockets where it seems to be a problem.
And the catalysts for stalk rot historically have been what?
Well, so there's a number of issues, and we have to understand that there are like 4 different stalk rots that can occur in Kansas. By far, the most common is fusarium stalk rot. And fusarium, kind of in general, likes a weather pattern where it's fairly wet in the beginning of the season, gets pretty hot and droughty in the middle, and then turns wet towards the end, which if you think back to 2019, in a lot of parts of the state, that's exactly what we had. We had trouble getting corn planted because it was so wet. And then from late June through most of July, it didn't rain a whole lot in a lot of places. I checked Manhattan. I think we were less than 2 inches for the most part in July. And then we've been very wet since about the second week of August. So we've had great weather conditions for fusarium stalk rot. Now, we also get charcoal rot, and charcoal rot is just kind of the opposite. It just likes it hot and dry for extended periods of time, especially during the grain fill period. Now, we have, because of that long, hot, dry July, we have found a smattering of charcoal rot out there. But most of what I've been seeing has been fusarium stalk rot. We also have anthracnose stalk rot and diplodocus stalk rot. Those are going to be a problem when we have fairly wet mid-summers. I think with the rains not coming until August, we don't have probably a lot of anthracnose and diplodocus stalk rot out there this year, although I have seen some diplodia ear rot, which is basically the same disease in the ear as in the stalk. But so yes, fusarium stalk rot, first of all, so the weather conditions have been good. Now there are some other issues that have come along. And I think one of the real important ones is nitrogen deficiency. We all know that there was a large concern early in the season that a lot of the initial nitrogen that went on was lost either to denitrification up into the air or perhaps moving down into the water table and left the plants pretty short. In some cases, growers were able to get on and supply some supplemental nitrogen, and so that's good. But I was in a lot of fields through the summer that, to me, were obviously nitrogen deficient. And so that is one of the causes. Another cause is leaf health. We know that if we have a healthy plant that's photosynthesizing normally, we're going to get good grain fill, and we're going to have a healthy plant all up and down. If we start to lose photosynthetic leaf area for whatever reason, the plant is not photosynthesizing enough to fill grain. That's what its mission in life is to do. So it goes down and mobilizes carbohydrate reserves in the root and the crown area of the plant, moves those up into the filling grain. When that happens, that leaves the roots and stalks kind of in a weakened state, if you will, health-wise, and these soil-borne pathogens like Fusarium then have an opportunity to infect through the roots and move up through the stalk. So, having said that, in a lot of places in the state, gray leaf spot's a problem every year. Mm-hmm. It started out slow this year, but I was surprised as we got into the later summer in some of the fields I went into how much there was. There was quite a bit. And then secondly, and as we've talked about in a couple of previous interviews, we've got the southern rust issue out there. I was just out today in some very late planted fields, and southern rust is hitting them really hard at this point. Probably too late to do anything about it, but those leaves are starting to dry up. We still got a significant amount of grain fill to go, and so that may lead to a problem. Now, out in western Kansas, I've had reports that in some areas this has been an extensively bad year for spider mites. And we actually did some research back in the late 80s or early 90s where we were looking at spider mite treatments, particularly for two-spotted spider mite, and looking at different chemical controls. And as we were doing the spider mite research with the chemicals, we were also taking stalk rot ratings. Mm-hmm. And we did a little correlation analysis, and it was pretty clear that the higher the mite populations, the more stalk rot we had. And so when mite pressure is bad, you start to lose leaves, that photosynthetic capacity, and it appears to be going downhill. So we've got a number of different things going on there where we've got poor leaf health for several different reasons. We got the nitrogen shortage, we've got the wet, dry, wet cycle, and it's all adding up to a considerable amount of stalk rot.
Considering all of that, Doug, is there a simple way that a grower can identify that their corn has lost integrity in that stalk and is likely prone to lodging if it hasn't happened already?
Actually, there's a fairly easy test that researchers sometimes use, and it's called the tipping test. And you walk down the row and you grab a corn plant, in the upper part of the plant, and you push it to about a 45-degree angle. If it snaps right back, you're probably pretty good. If you push it out and it kinks near the bottom, then that would be indicated as a stalk rot plant. So you can, take an area of 50 or 100 foot a row, and with the two rows you're walking in between and give them a push, and let's say you look at 100 plants and 50 of them kink, then you've got about a 50% lodging or potential lodging problem, 50% stalk rot. The other thing to keep in mind about stalk rot is even if that corn never lodges, those plants die prematurely and we have smaller ears. And that's where the real kind of hidden loss from stalk rot comes in. So let's say you have 50% stalk rotted plants and that ear is 50% smaller, which is a very possible size difference. So 50% smaller ear and 50% of the plants, that's a 25% yield loss right there. So it's fairly easily calculable.
So much can contribute to this condition, though. Is there anything for future reference that producers might want to keep well in mind from this fall's harvest experience in as far as avoiding a repeat next year?
Sure. There are no silver bullets,
right,
but there are a number of kind of additive things that you can do. One is to start with a hybrid that has good stay green characters and good standability characters, because those are highly correlated to stalk rot resistance. It's not true resistance as we think of it genetically, but it's very correlative. So look for hybrids that, of course, yield well, but have good stay green and good standability characteristics. You want to be careful not to overplant your populations for the available moisture, because when that happens, then we're putting stress on that plant, and we're allowing those pathogens maybe to take hold. Good leaf health. That means control your gray leaf spot, control your southern rust if it's necessary. If you're out west, control your spider mites, but you want to keep those leaves healthy. And then the last thing is to make sure that you're fertilizing adequately. And one of the things we've learned from research over time is you want to be careful of your nitrogen and potash ratios. If you get too high a nitrogen content compared to potash, for whatever reason, that seems to promote additional stalk rot. So, don't overuse nitrogen for your yield potential, but also pay attention to what your potash levels are. And if you need potash, be sure to put it out there.
All right. So lessons learned potentially from this year. But for the here and now, if producers haven't gone out and they've still a ways to go before that corn is fully ready, dried down, ready for picking, they should take a look and see what's going on because of how common stalk rot is this year.
Right. And one other thing that I really didn't mention, but some producers are using the strobilurin-type fungicides because they help to keep the plant greener longer. I've had many producers tell me that when they've used that fungicide, they in fact see better standability out in the field. And there is some research going on around the country kind of trying to verify that. And it looks like that might be the case. But on the other hand, when you have plants staying green longer, you're not getting as quick a dry down. So there are some offsets there. But, if you can tell a farmer that he can drive the combine faster because the corn is standing, he's going to think very highly of that type of management option.
We'll keep an eye on that alternative, see if it comes to fruition in full here in the years ahead. Thanks for the briefing right here on what's going on with our corn stands and those lodging problems. We'll catch up with you again soon.
You're welcome.
Doug Jardine is a row crop disease specialist at K-State Research and Extension, outlining the circumstances that have led to stalk rot and general lodging problems in our corn as we push further into this harvest season. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll return with more after these moments aside on the K-State Radio Network. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Welcome back. You are listening to Agriculture Today. We're well into September, obviously, about to make the transition into the month of October. For those of you who are still inclined to plant canola in Kansas, depending on where you are in the state, you still potentially have an opportunity before you. We want to talk about that and some things about getting canola off on the right foot at planting time. Joining us once more is K-State canola agronomist Mike Stamm, who's been out in the field planting his test plots of late. And Mike, we normally like to see canola go in a little earlier in the month in some parts of Kansas, but there are exceptions, and there is still that time for some producers, you say.
Yeah, that's true, Eric. So, we're really talking about the south central part of the state right now with, the next 2 weeks here to plant winter canola and still be in that optimal window. So with some important rains down there this week, there might be a few guys that decide they might put some in this year.
And you move a little further north, there might be a sliver of time yet for those producers as well.
Yeah, the insurance cutoff is coming up pretty quick for central Kansas, so September 30 is that date for the remainder of the state. And so, yeah, if you're going to get it in before that window, time's pretty critical right now. So I know some guys may have gotten some rain here recently that would keep them out of the field, but yeah, now is really the optimal time. So if you're going to get it in and you're in central Kansas, now's the time. And if you're in northern Kansas, it should well be in the ground by now. So we've planted our research plots in Belleville and in Manhattan and Hutchinson in that optimal window. So And right now it's kind of a wait and see.
And for those who would entertain the idea, one of the real attributes of canola is it's a great rotational crop. It can be beneficial in breaking up pest cycles, etc.
That's right. We really look at winter canola as kind of a symbiotic crop with winter wheat, and especially in the south central part of the state where we grow a lot of continuous wheat still. And having the two winter crops work together, one being a broadleaf, one being a grass, we really see a lot of benefit to having canola in a wheat-based cropping system to break up those hard-to-control weed and disease cycles in continuous wheat. So we certainly feel like that fit is there in the south central part of the state, but we also feel like it's got potential for fit in other cropping systems across the state as well.
Especially following corn directly, if one is timely in their corn picking?
Right. Corn would be another crop that we could plant winter canola after. But again, that corn crop has to come off fairly early. Now we're talking about around September 1st for most of the state, just to give yourself maybe some time for some soil moisture recharge, catch a rain before seeding. Probably the most important thing, though, with corn we have to keep in mind is the herbicide restrictions that we often see with the herbicides that we use in corn production. So my recommendation to growers who want to follow corn with canola, they really got to plan ahead and find those herbicides that will fit canola in the rotation, because many of them have plant back restrictions that can be 18 to 24 months. So you really got to keep that in mind.
And speaking of weed control, that's a primary pre-plant operation for canola, isn't it? Especially
if you're growing a conventional open pollinated variety or hybrid variety on the broadleaf side of the equation. So with conventional canola, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of post-emergence broadleaf control products. There are a couple that are labeled, but their efficacy isn't real good on some of the hard-to-control weeds like the winter annual mustard species. So if you're using a conventional canola product, you want to think about applying Treflan, particularly ahead of planting, get that incorporated, and then get your canola crop seeded. That'll give you some broadleaf and a little bit of grass control. Now, on the Roundup Ready side of the equation, Roundup is very easy to apply post-emergence in winter canola. So, if you're planting into a field that has a history of broadleaf weed control problems, I really try to work with guys to think about selecting a Roundup Ready variety that they could plant on those acres so they have that option of controlling those broadleaf weeds. If they're just trying to control the grassy weed species that we often see in our winter annual crops, then conventional works just fine, because we have good grass control products that we can apply post-emergence.
Mike, is canola a good candidate in a no-till situation?
Yes, it certainly can be. Now, we've talked about this on the radio program a lot in years past, the learning experiences we've had with growing canola in no-tillage. So, again, a good reminder for growers is that if they're going to plant canola no-till, they really have to have some kind of residue managers on their drill or on their planter, even if that's what they're using to seed the crop. Canola doesn't like that heavy residue in the seed row. We need to do what we can to move that residue out of the way so the plant can emerge and then have some bare soil around it. We see buffering effects from that residue, but then we also see some light issues with that residue in the seed row. So the most important thing is just to remove the residue out of the seed row so the crop can get adequate light and develop its crown on the ground. That will provide the best protection for that plant going into the winter months.
Nor does canola, you've reminded us before, like wet feet. Poorly drained soils are not good alternatives for canola.
Yeah, and we certainly saw that this past spring with all the rainfall that we had back in the month of May when the canola was flowering and moving into pod fill and then ripening. The fields that were just prone to standing water did not look very good at the end of the season, and some of them were actual complete losses. And I know that's hard to pick those fields in some years when we have so much rain like we did last spring, but we all pretty well should know which fields are good for drainage and which fields are not. So certainly lean towards those fields where the water is drained and the canola is not standing there in water, because it certainly was an issue this past spring.
Well, Mike, let's talk a little about variety selection and varietal performance. This is right in your wheelhouse as a canola breeder. We've seen immense improvement in varietal tolerance of winter conditions in the state in recent years.
That's right, Eric. I would say that's certainly the trait that we've focused our attention on over the years that I've been working with this crop. So we have a number of varieties, both conventional and Roundup Ready now, that we feel have a pretty good fit for the majority of the state. And we really couldn't say that 15 years ago. So we've tried to select varieties that can handle some of this variable weather that we've been experiencing the last several years. And so, again, with variety selection, you want that winter hardy variety. That's probably number one. But then when it comes to the other traits, like your herbicide resistances, like we talked about, I try to work with growers on selecting the varieties that are the best fit for their operation. The conventionals, certainly on fields where we have grassy weed issues, those are certainly an option. But again, where we have the broadleaf issues and we're trying to control that with canola, then your Roundup Ready varieties are a better option. We also have hybrid varieties now that we've seen come onto the market. These aren't developed by our program, but we are in the process of converting a large portion of our breeding program into hybrid parent line development for future hybrids. But these hybrids have come over from Europe, and some of them certainly have tremendous adaptability to our environment. And these come from breeding programs that have a long history of canola variety development. So they're really focusing in on specific traits now. In these years where we've had very good moisture conditions throughout the growing season, we've seen excellent performance in these hybrids. So if there are growers that really want to push the yield envelope and we've got good conditions, kind of like we do in most places in Kansas this year for establishment, then I certainly would encourage a producer to think about planting one of these hybrids.
Well, as you say, because of insurance considerations, we may be getting late for certain parts of Kansas. If one is thinking irrespectively of that, they can still plant canola if we have an extended fall to accommodate it.
And right now, with the extended forecast, it looks like we're going to be warmer than normal, maybe a little bit wetter than normal. So getting the crop in over the next 2 to 3 weeks would certainly be beneficial. Unfortunately, we can't plant canola into November, no. But within those first 10 days of October, I think there's still a chance, especially when we're looking at we're going to have an extended fall.
And you have posted loads of information on canola production, canola variety and hybrid selection on the K-State Agronomy website. Folks can access all of that handily.
That's right, and they can also look for our old e-updates that are stored on the website as well. There's lots of good information there about canola establishment and varieties that we feel could have a potential fit for Kansas. So, yeah, I encourage growers to look at that information as well.
Well, off we go on another canola production season in the state, starting right now, obviously, running through next spring, early summer. Best of luck with your field plots and your work from here forward. Mike, thanks so much for the update.
Thanks again, Eric.
He's a canola agronomist with the K-State Department of Agronomy, Mike Stamm there. And again, you can find all of that information that he has accumulated over several years on canola production at agronomy.ksu.edu. You are tuned into Agriculture Today. Now this break. When we come back, today's agricultural news headlines are coming your way. Also, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. Greg Akagi stands by with that. And once more, our horticulture feature for the week. All of that is still ahead here on the K-State Radio Network. Please stay with us.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're listening to Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here, and next up for you, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. And the lead story, of course, that U.S.-Japan trade deal has come through. Japan will lower or eliminate tariffs on roughly half of all U.S. agricultural and food exports to Japan, according to the deal signed yesterday by President Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. This deal provides the U.S. with parity to what other countries received in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trump administration said the agreement would lower or eliminate tariffs into Japan's markets for about $7 billion in agricultural products. The USDA's Gary Crawford takes a closer look.
President Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Abe have signed a trade agreement.
It's a great agreement, and it's a big win for U.S. agriculture.
Deputy Agriculture Secretary Steve Sedski was in New York at the signing of the deal, and on a large scale, here's what it does. Right now, the U.S. sells Japan about $14 billion worth of ag products.
And we have about $6 billion of that's already duty-free. And under this agreement, another $7 billion tariffs will be either eliminated or reduced and will be competitive to match any of our competitors in that market. And so that's going to cover around 90% of the dutiable trade that we have going into Japan.
Sedski says the next step for the agreement?
Dotting the I's and crossing the T's here in the next couple of weeks.
With the hope to have it kick into operation January 1st. It does not need congressional approval. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Responding to the announcement of the deal, the U.S. Grains Council stated that the deal would solidify our long-standing partnership for the future and create a platform for growth into new sales and new sectors, including the potential for sales of U.S. ethanol, in the Council's statement. And the National Pork Producers Council cited Iowa State University economist Dermot Hayes, projecting that pork sales would increase from about $1.6 billion annually to $2.2 billion over the next 15 years due to the lower duties. Fresh and frozen beef and pork will see lower tariffs. Japan will have some safeguards in place to avoid surges of imports of beef, pork, and certain other products. Reuters notes that Japan would lower tariffs on about 240,000 metric tons of beef, or about 90% of what the U.S. exports to Japan. U.S. beef producers were seeking to lower the tariff from 38.5% down to 9% to match what competitors such as Canada and Australia are paying exporting to Japan. Wheat and wheat products will receive a specific quota for lower tariff rates. Meantime, after months of campaigning for the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, the impeachment inquiry into President Trump could derail that trade deal. The White House and Senate Finance Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley of Iowa signaled that the House Democrats' impeachment inquiry might mean that Congress will not take up approval of USMCA. Just over the past 2 weeks, farm groups and former secretaries of agriculture have held events in Washington encouraging House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to bring the new trade deal to the floor. Agriculture groups see the USMCA boosting exports to Canada and stabilizing trade with Mexico, two of the top markets, of course, for our agricultural exports. The vast majority of Democrats on the House Agriculture Committee agree with Pelosi's decision to begin the formal impeachment inquiry against the president. However, House Agriculture Committee Chairman Colin Peterson said that he fears this impeachment inquiry will be, in his words, a failed process. In a statement from his office, Peterson said, quoting him, "I believe it will be a failed process that will end up even further dividing our country and weakening our ability to act together on issues like passing the USMCA, containing foreign threats, and growing our economy." Also yesterday, the president again shifted his commentary on the U.S.-China trade situation, proclaiming that an agreement between the two sides could come faster than most think. He continued his positive tone, stating here that China is starting to buy our agricultural products again. But as he has shown previously, he followed up then by commenting, "The question is, do we want to make a deal?" His remarks yesterday stand in contrast to the harsh words about Chinese policies broadly that he delivered to the United Nations back on Tuesday. Coming your way now, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. And with that, as always, is Greg Akagi. Greg?
Ron Oldie from Palmer is joining us. He serves as the vice chairman of the Kansas Soybean Commission. And Ron, the commission is requesting research and education proposals for its fiscal year 2021, which begins July 1st of next year. But the deadline to get those proposals in are coming up pretty quick.
Yes, the deadline for those RFPs is coming up fast. The deadline is 15th of October, so it will be here before we know it.
Ron, for the commissioners itself, when you get those ideas in, this covers a wide range of topics as far as the request for proposals, in this case for funding those proposals when they come into the commission.
We as commissioners are looking for all types of alternatives to find new uses for soybean oil. And proposals can range from, the food industry, medical. We've even had proposals for Goodyear because we've got uses in the Goodyear tires. Ford uses some beans in their foam and their seats, and proposals for researchers, for all across the state. Aquaculture is another one that it's just a very wide range that we're looking for better uses to improve the profitability of the Kansas soybean farmer.
And there is a process that you go through with regards to reviewing, getting a preliminary approval from the commissioners, and that leads up to formal presentations as well?
That is correct. Our meetings will be coming up probably somewhere first part of December, where all the proposals are gathered, and then we as commissioners, we sit down for, basically 2.5 to 3 days, where we sit down and we go through each proposal, and then we evaluate them, and then we decide which projects that we want to fund.
And if people want more information or like to get those forms on the request for proposals, they can go to your guys' website?
Yes, they can. They can go on the website, or they can call the commission office and speak to one of the individuals there. So, yes, it's quite a process that we go through.
And that website is kansassoybeans.org/forms. That is Ron Oldie from Palmer, who serves as the vice chairman of the Kansas Soybean Commission, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Greg Akagi there. Thanks, Greg. We'll be back in a moment. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, our weekly time set aside to talk horticultural matters. At this time, we're visiting with Dennis Patton once again. Dennis is the Johnson County Extension Horticultural Agent for K-State, and we're into that time of the year now, Dennis, when folks can plant, if they're so inclined, new tree or shrub plantings in their home landscape. Right to it, why one would consider a fall planting as opposed to spring planting of trees and shrubs.
Well, the advantage of fall planting is that even though it's cooling down air temperature-wise, our soil temperatures are still quite warm. And so by planting those trees in the fall, we can actually get a month to 2 months of root development just to give those trees a little bit of jump start on spring, and then, of course, whatever summer will throw our way come 2020. So it's really all about root development and growth underground that you never really see, but it all pays dividends in the end.
And that happens only through good management, which we'll talk about. Do all species acclimate well to fall planting as opposed to spring planting?
You know, there are some that do better in the spring versus fall. What I usually tell people is avoid planting in the fall what I call niche trees, those that may just be a little bit more susceptible to winter injury or extremes of our weather patterns. But, our durable trees like oaks and maples, elms, all do really fine planted in the winter months. Like I said, those little niche trees, like up here in Johnson County, we've got a lot of suburbanites who like little Japanese maples, redbuds, those type of things you may want to avoid fall planting. They just may not take the ups and downs this winter quite as easily.
If you have any doubts about it, why, you can refer to your local nursery outlet.
Correct.
And they'll tell you for sure about that. Well, procedure here, it all starts with the planting site and adequate preparation of that site, correct?
That's correct. The old saying's been, you buy a $5 tree and make a $50 planting hole. Now it's probably $150 and $250, but you get the point. We want to make sure that we do dig a hole. And actually, the good news about tree planting is you don't necessarily have to dig deep, but we want to dig wide. The rule of thumb is really don't dig the hole any deeper than the root ball that you're planting because we don't want the tree to sink deeper into the soil. But research has shown the wider you dig that hole, the more you loosen up those compacted, heavy Kansas clay soils. And so then when you backfill, all those roots can get out quickly into that nice, fresh, loose soil to really help speed up that root development, which, like I said, is what we're really talking about when it comes to tree planting. So don't dig deep, but dig wide.
And the rule of thumb then, twice as wide as the ball is wide, is that correct?
That's a great rule for the minimum size. I mean, there's even some research. You can dig the hole 5 times the diameter of the root ball, depth of the root ball, to really give it a good start. But most people aren't quite that energetic. I know I planted a tree in my own front yard this year, and, it was a hot day, and with my neighbor and I, by the time we got about twice the root ball, it's like, yep, I think we're done.
But again, keep it adequate so that those roots can grow vigorously and quickly as they are established. Once you have that tree placed, the tree root ball that is, you make sure and loosen up that ball so the roots can, in fact, fan out.
Yeah. We want to make sure we take any of the containers off, pots off, especially with a container-grown tree. Even balled and burlap trees, it's really good to go ahead and make sure we get all the strings, the wires, pull back as much of that burlap as possible so we can expose those roots to the soil and get them out and growing. And then we also want to kind of look real closely to make sure there aren't any roots kind of growing or spiring around that trunk of the tree. We want to make sure they're growing out so they don't girdle the tree later on. And then once you do that, you can backfill, water the tree, get it settled in, and then you're on your way to success.
And watering is the initial step, and making sure that those roots remain moist well into the late fall and winter then?
Right. Yeah, one of the issues we can have with Kansas winters is it can either be wet or it can be dry, or it could be both. And so one of the things you got to make sure you stay up on with watering in the winter months is, if it is a dry winter, not a lot of snowfall or rainfall, that you will need to water it when the soils are not frozen and it's above freezing. But that may just be once a month. It's not like your July or August watering every week, 10 days when it's really hot. But you don't want the tree, the desiccate, to dry out over the winter months.
Just to keep monitoring that through the fall and winter.
Right. Hey, one other thing we kind of skipped over, but I need to back us up on it with planting that tree. You're not really done planting it until you get that good layer of mulch down around the tree itself. All that soil you've loosened up, taken the grass away. It's really a great idea to put down a 2 to 3 inch layer of some sort of mulching material, whether that be, wood chip or, some people got grass clippings, leaves, straw available to them. Something that's going to help buffer that soil from the extremes of drying out and heat and temperature during the summer. And the other nice thing about that mulch is, in addition to conserving moisture, it also keeps the grass away from the base of the tree. And K-State and other universities have found that if you keep that grass out 2-3 feet around that tree, over a 10-year period of growth time, you can almost double the growth rate by getting rid of that grass competition.
So good 2 to 3 inch mulch is worthwhile here. How about staking the tree, Dennis? Now, it'll be losing leaves as we get into the late fall and winter, but still those winter winds can whip that tree around pretty well, can they not?
Correct, yeah. I think the ideal would be not to have to stake the tree, let it move a little bit on its own. But if it's in a really windy side, a lot of canopy that's going to catch the wind, then yes, staking, is a good idea. You stake about a third of the way up on the tree itself, and you want the supports to be loose. You don't want anything that's going to cut into the bark of the tree or going to scratch or scrape, bruise the trunk of the tree. And the purpose of stakes is really just to keep it more or less upright, but we want it to sway, move back and forth in the breeze, because here again, that helps those root system know that I've got to, toughen up, so to speak, to help support that tree. And usually a stake's just left on for one growing season. So if you planted this, September, October, next fall, into summer next year, you could remove those stakes and be good to go. You don't want the tree to become dependent on the stake itself. And here again, make sure the stake doesn't rub on the tree itself or a branch, sway back and forth on the top of the stake. Some people kind of put one stake at a 45-degree angle kind of next to the trunk of the tree itself and out a few inches and then stake it. Or you can use 2 stakes, 3 stakes. There's a lot of different methods, and K-State has a great little publication on planting trees that shows some of the various staking options.
Dennis, thanks for the comments, as always.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Eric.
He's the Johnson County Extension Horticultural Agent, is Dennis Patton, and sharing those thoughts on fall tree planting on this week's Horticulture segment. Once again, thanks for tuning in. Please rejoin us here tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.